Hey Eric, how you doing?
Yes, I think we are live on YouTube. If people could um maybe track us on YouTube so that YouTube's algorithm will know that we are interesting. Yes, I think we
Uh,
are live on YouTube. Oop, I probably want to make sure that I'm muted in that tab. Oh, okay, that'll be better. Cool. Now do we have next week's speaker? We're going to have a project manager who's going to be talking next week about how she uses AI tools in product management. So I just I just put that one up. Her name is um, Tanny Ing. So I want to, while we're waiting for people to show up, do a little marketing for next week. Um, Maybe actually this is a good time, while we're waiting for people to show up, Mark, to talk about your books, your history in computing, stuff that won't, that if people don't hear it, they won't not understand your talk.
that would be fine, but I guess maybe a lot of people are on YouTube, but we have just a few people here. Could we take a minute and have people just introduce themselves, if you don't mind? Um,
Not at all.
yeah, if anybody wants
People who
to
are willing to, we
say
can do this.
hello.
I can send who you were the first person. So maybe you'd like to, either with video or just voice, tell us about yourself.
Um, no, I think I'd actually rather wait till I start giving my talk. Okay, Bell is connecting to audio. I see
Dave,
Kent.
do you want to
Hey,
introduce
Kent.
yourself?
Who are you asking?
Dave, do you want to say hello? Oh, hey, Kent. Um, so Mark, I don't know how well you know Kent Pittman, but as a Lisp programmer, you should know Kent
We,
Pittman
we, we
because,
talked for about an hour a couple months ago. Yeah.
okay,
Well, if nobody really wants to say hello, how about if I just get started? Excuse me.
you certainly
Uh,
may.
Let me share my screen here. Off to the side. Try to hide the pictures of everybody. So I was going to, hang on one second. It's funny, sharing my screen disoriented everything. I was going to start talking about what it was like back in the beginning for me. I started getting paid uh, to do sort of AI tasks back in the early 80s. And back then we had a scaling problem. Some things worked really well, like simple neural networks, like backprop networks, uh, were effective engineering tools. I made a bomb detector that my company did for the FAA function properly using a backprop, and that was all good. But in symbolic AI, we kind of had like a scaling problem. I spent about 2 years of my life, maybe I should say wasted 2 years of my life, doing something called conceptual dependency theory, which was basically mapping English language uh, to sort of frame-like structures. You could sort of uh, reason with language and solve problems and create simple question answering systems, but it didn't scale. Right? The more complicated it got, the amount of human engineering time kind of went up exponentially. And so we're going to fast forward, 40 years now into the future. And you notice that about a week ago, I put a simple web page link in our group message. And I created that using ChatGPT by doing something as simple as giving it some basic data and asking it to generate HTML and CSS for this. Which is all fine and good, saved me probably 10 minutes worth of my time, but not anything earth shattering. But I think it's in the 1990s, I became interested in sort of the artificial human language Esperanto because a friend of mine spoke it pretty fluently. And back then I was wondering if maybe that wasn't a key to interacting with computers, a simpler language with a more regular grammar, maybe even something like Sanskrit, ancient Sanskrit, like the Bhagavad Gita was written in, is a perfect language and that it is unambiguous. But we don't really need that anymore. I can ask a large language model to, I'll say, that was good, comma, translate to French. Well, the CSS is still in English. Yeah, sorry, this is running so slowly, but you'll notice that it's all in French. So that's kind of fine and good. And I guess I'm going to go back in history a little bit again. And I wanted to show you something I did about 4 years ago that I was extremely proud of that used a transformer model. BERT is a BERT model, to be specific, that could take a page or so of text and then it could answer a question based on that. Much weaker than things like ChatGPT can do now, but still useful. And that worked by not using data from the web, but from something called semantic web data, RDF. And I'm going to, because that first program example I'm going to show you uses SPARQL, I'm just going to kind of show you briefly what SPARQL does. Here we go. Yeah, okay. So SPARQL is basically like SQL, but for graph data. And here I'm asking what the capital of France is, and sure enough, it can do that fine. So once again, it's a language like SQL, but for graph data. And I was querying DBpedia, which is basically structured data from Wikipedia. So now I'm going to jump into this example. And like I said, I originally did this about 4 years ago, then cleaned up the code a year or so later. But the idea conceptually is super easy. I mean, basically, I'm going to be using a Python library called SpaCy that given English text will tell you what the proper nouns are. And I'm interested specifically in people's names, place names, organizations. And then this little bit of code, and there's a link on the notes for this talk if you want to try running this yourself. Um, Basically, any query that I use, I first of all find the proper nouns and organizations in it, do a Sparkle query to get information about it, and then create context text, and then use the BERT type of transformer model to answer the question. And 4 years ago, I was delighted by this. You know, let me start at the end, show you what it actually does. If I ask where Bill Gates worked, Spacey's going to identify Bill Gates as a human being. It's going to, hang on a sec, somebody just left a message. Yeah, I just wanted to check, make sure that people could hear me okay.
You sound
so-
great to me.
Yeah. So Spacey tells me Bill Gates is a person. I do a Sparkle query to Wikipedia, the semantic web, if you will, to get context information, collect that all, and then pass through the transform model and see that Microsoft is where he works, and two other things. I'm not sure if I'm actually the code here is really pretty simple. The only complicated thing is decoding JSON data returned from DBpedia, or actually Sparkle results, and pulling the data out. But you all have the code to this if you want to try running this. And again, this is something that is like 4 years old. And I was, this was about an hour hack one Saturday morning. And I felt like I had personally hit a little bump, a little increase in capability in what I could do. When I wrote this, I had just stopped working at Capital One. I was running a deep learning team, and we used deep learning models for all kinds of neat engineering tasks. But this to me made me happy. Felt like it was something I could do at home, and I felt like sort of inching towards what maybe real might be. So I wanted to skip forward now to the present time and basically solve that same problem again with much less complexity using a large language model. Now, this is a Jupyter notebook running in Google Colab. And I like Colab. If you pay Google $10 a month for it, it has some really nice features like being able to store environment variable keys. I'm going to be using the OpenAI APIs in these examples, so I've enabled a Python code running to be able to access my personal key, which hopefully is not visible. And the notebook, and again, you all have a link to this, so you can play with it later, has 3 sections. And the first one is basically going to be the same sort of thing, question answering, but I don't have to deal with highly structured semantic web data, RDF data, graph data, and I'm just dealing with plain text. And I'm using the DuckDuckGo search engine. And here I'm asking for a Common Lisp and deep learning consultant. Spoiler alert, my name shows up. Probably Kent Pittman's, who is here at this today. His name probably should have showed up there, but anyway, now the problem that was a little tricky 4 years ago is basically trivial. I take a human query, get back search results. I want to see what the search results look like. It's just, I think I'd return 10 or 20 searches as if you were using a web browser. Here, I'm just simply taking all the results, concatenating the title and the description for all of them into one big blob of text. Actually, you can see that if you want. And let's see. Now, given that blob of text and my query, I'm going to use the OpenAI APIs for GPT 4.0, I think I'm using. And, I can't, I have all the video turned off. I can't see. I'm kind of assuming most of you have probably used ChatGPT interactively a lot using the web interface, and you may or may not have used like the Python interface to it. But hopefully, I hope you play with this code later. That it's pretty easy to work with. It's really pretty trivial. Here we're just taking the context text is everything I collected from the web search to DuckDuckGo, one big blob of text, and then the question that I asked and specifying what model, and then I get a when I run this here. Here I'm asking what programming languages that I use. Wait a minute. Oh, I'm so sorry. I think I deleted a output cell for the results of that first. Yes, it looks like I did. I was cleaning this up last night and I think I cleaned up too much. Yeah, this is not in there. Oh, as part of answering that question, it searched my personal website, markwatson.com. And so it's able to answer the question, what programming languages do I use? And you can see that that seem to have gotten them all there correctly. Here's another question. What's the capital of France? Pretty simple, single word. So I thought this example was going to take about 1 minute to go through because it's so simple, but I'm talking too slowly. Somebody
Mark,
just
do you
left a
want to tell
message in
people
the
where
chat.
they
I'm
should
gonna
put their
check it
own
real
key?
quick.
Where they will put their own key in so that
Oh, absolutely. Yes. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah. So if you are running on Colab, uh, if you pay them for the pro plan, they have an option that lets you put a bunch of keys into uh, 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 basically encrypted storage, and then using a little bit of code, you can pull it out. And so that way you don't have to put your keys for Anthropic, Google Search API key, et cetera. Um, so if you pay them the $10 a month, you can be clean and do it this way. If you don't, um, right up here, do you see where I'm getting the API key out of um, an environment variable? What you would do is you would just simply change this to like SK, whatever your OpenAI API key is. And one thing you don't have to really worry about is uh, it, if you pay OpenAI to use ChatGPT with the pro version of the web, they charge you like $20 a month, which I don't think is a very good deal. But if you use their APIs, it's really inexpensive. I think you can ingest like a megabyte of text for 20 cents or something, and it probably costs maybe 50 cents per megabyte of output. So um, I use uh, uh, OpenAI a lot. I like to use Anthropic. Anyscale I don't use quite as often. I don't have it here, but there's a service called Grok that they use special purpose hardware to run LLMs, and it's very, very inexpensive. Um, and so as long as you're just making these API calls, you really don't have to worry about spending very much money. I mean, I'd be surprised if you spent more than $1 or $2 a month on it. Uh, and I'm going to just real quickly just to see everybody. Okay. The next, I know what I wanted to show you also. I guess this talk was sort of advertised that I'd be mostly going over LangChain and Llama Index examples from a book I wrote about a year ago. And I'm not going to actually go into that much detail on LangChain today, but I put a link to these are just my recent ebooks, and these are all absolutely free to read. And let me show you. Uh, Follow that link. I clicked on the LangChain Llama Index book, and do you see down here where it says free to read online? I really don't want your money. Don't you don't have to buy it. And the book is there in the preface. It has the GitHub repo with all the examples. And uh, and hopefully if you're interested after listening to me for an hour or so, you can delve into the book a little bit. I'm going to digress a little bit. I used to write, I wrote about 10 books for like Springer Verlag and McGraw-Hill and Jay Wiley and whatnot. And I stopped doing that about 15 years ago because I like to have my stuff free on the web for people to read. And also, the LangChain book is a really good example. I think I released that maybe 14 months ago, and I've updated it like 12 times. Uh, And so it's a very nice way to share information with people. So anyway, so you can use that as a free reference. You can have access to the GitHub repo for all that code. So I invite you to have fun with that later. I have a few more examples in this Jupyter notebook I want to run through before
Just so you don't forget the links to the
going.
ebooks, Mark.
Oh, yeah. Let's see here. It is it's on the on your meetup.com page,
Oh, awesome.
but I think it's just I think it's just my website is markwatson.com, and I think it's just talk.html. Yeah. And so it has links to everything that you might need. Yeah, thanks for that reminder. Okay, let's I'm about 1/3 as far as I thought I would be so far. Let me move on to this example. I wanted this is basically RAG is retrieval augmented generation. With large language model, we're basically generating text. And what a RAG system is ingesting it could be a few books, text from PDF files, large text files, and making what's called basically a forgetting what it's called. Great. A hang on a second. It basically makes an index, embedding index from the input text. Now, text embeddings came on the scene maybe 8 or 10 years ago, where people discovered that they could capture features of human text in a vector of, say, 1,000 floating point numbers. And for OpenAI, their embeddings, I think, are 1,356 or something like that. So basically, if I take the text of several text files and break it into chunks of maybe 1,000 characters each and calculate a embedding for each of those chunks, that embedding is going to be a single point in a space of dimension 1,356 for OpenAI. So that's a single point. And the idea is that similar text embeds to a similar location in that space. And so if we, in this example, we're only going to ingest some of the text from Shakespeare, and we're going to be dividing it up into, I think it's like 2,000 character chunks, and each chunk is going to be referenced somewhere in that embedding space. And so then if you ask a question, like in the example I have here, I'm going to ask, who is Hamlet's mother? That question is going to be mapped into that same embedding space. And we look through like a very inexpensive cosine operation, basically multiplying two vectors together is almost cheap, almost free computationally. We're going to find the chunks of text from the original text that are semantically similar to the question. And let me just really quickly go through this code. Basically, I'm going to be grabbing the text for a subset of Shakespeare. I'm going to be using part of the LangChain library to create a text loader and load each document into an array of documents. In this case, there's only one document. And then we split the text in all the documents, I guess, into 1,500 character chunks. We're asking OpenAI for their embedding model. Uh, the embed base I use is called Chroma open source. And, it's available, and it's also its open source project. And
Who's
now I'm
having audio
creating
problems
a
hearing Mark right
model
now besides me?
using a really old model that still works. I'm sorry, could you repeat that?
Mark, we're having a little bit of audio problem with you. At least, so maybe we
I can
wait
hear it fine.
and then go back 60 seconds worth.
Oh, you know what? Yeah, I'll set closer to. Yeah. Yeah. So anyway, we create a embedding database using Chroma from the text that we have. And basically we're creating this is a LangChain abstraction, which is a way, I guess it's supposedly an easier way to use the OpenAI APIs. And we're passing it the GPT 3.5 model. We're passing it the vector store, which contains the chunks of text represented as these 1,356 element vectors. And this is now basically a callable function. If I was just asking us one question, I would just simply call this QA chain as a function, but I wanted to make this a interactive loop. And maintaining a chat history so that you could ask it multiple questions and remember what the previous questions were. Anyway, pretty simple text. And when I run this, this is the prompt. Ask a question about Shakespeare's work. I asked who's Hamlet's mother, and it answered Queen Gertrude. And you can just keep asking questions. If you run this yourself, the code I'm using is just I'm assuming that everybody kind of knows Python, but I'm using the Python input function, which just simply accepts a string from the user. And when you run it in Google Colab, a little HTML input form box pops up. Anyway, that easy example. And if you run this yourself, some things I've tried is converting all of my recent books to plain text and using basically the same code. And incidentally, this scales because the Chroma database is really efficient. You can easily put a couple gigabytes of text Now, you will be paying for calculating those embeddings, but the embeddings API calls are very cheap, even cheaper than the generation. So you can take a couple gigabytes of text you want to chat against, and it's fairly cheap to run this. I mean, maybe 15 cents or something. Now,
Mark,
oh yeah,
if you want to tell people like when they're faced with problem X, that's the right time or a good time to consider LangChain. If you want to, do you want to talk for a
yes,
moment about
thank
that?
you. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, basically, LangChain is an abstraction to let you put multiple uh, uh, prompts in, if you will. Like I had one example that I decided not to show last night because it was a bit too long, but it was there's a system called Perplexity, uh, uh, which you can ask questions to, and it goes out and searches the web and creates a little report for you. And so a good use of LangChain that I've done recently is something very, very similar to the first example I showed you that did a single web query, but then to chain together more prompts where the context is each um, search result. And so I basically have the first series of prompts will rate each search result from Google or DuckDuckGo or Bing or whatever you're using as to how well it answers my question. And I can use that to discard them and then have another model chained to uh, do a summary over each one that was valid. And then for each one that was valid, take just the summaries and then use that to answer questions and build reports from. And actually, that shortened summary is also very useful. So that's the kind of thing that LangChain is good for. I tend not to use. A year ago, everything I did was in LangChain. Now I tend to write code from scratch just in Python to do what I want. Or I use the language Common Lisp a lot, and I'll code up everything from scratch in Common Lisp. But LangChain, especially when you are getting started, is just makes it a little bit easier. The other library that I have in the book, which I don't think I'm going to cover today, is Llama Index. And Llama Index is really good for dealing with different information sources, reading Microsoft Word files, PDF files, interacting with relational databases. And so Llama Index makes it easy to basically collect what I'm calling context text in my simple examples here. And so that's kind of like where you want to go depending on what your application is. Um, and I'm going to try to save some time at the end. I think what might be really good is if people have ideas that they want to try, and then those of us who've been hacking with this can maybe give some advice. So I'll try to keep a good 10 minutes at the end for that. But anyway, yeah, thanks. That was a really good question. Um, uh, I'm just going to this morning I added clock this morning, and Chris Stobel, who I follow, mentioned that he just added an example to the official LangChain notebooks. And the example was so cool, I thought I would show it to you. It's basically in my example, we're chatting against context of that text file. And for Stobel's example, which I just modified a tiny bit, we're chatting against a GitHub repository. So you can ask it questions about the code and maybe how to do things. That here is I'm going to need. You might have seen, if you're not Python developers, but there's the Git library allows you to do all kinds of simple operations on Git repos. And here I'm just simply grabbing my GitHub repo for my Racket AI book. Racket is a simpler form of Lisp than Common Lisp. And if you're curious about that, you can read that online if you want. And all this does is simply do a git clone on my repo, puts it into local file system, which I'm printing out here. You see that down there. And then I'm creating made a
Now you're breaking
mistake.
up a little
That
bit.
should be right. Language, language parser is a contributed library for LangChain that instead of parsing text, parses programming languages. And my Cristobal on his example he posted this morning was dealing with Python, and I carelessly didn't change that to Racket, but the example still works. And in the same way, where I split the text into chunks in the previous example for the Shakespeare's text, here we are splitting up all the Python and text files that are in the GitHub repo. And then we're creating embeddings. And once more, we're using the Chroma embeddings database, and this scales. Here, I've just used one GitHub repo, but you could quite easily put in many in a real system. Like I have, what do I have? I have 127 public GitHub repos. If I wanted to, I'm not going to, but if I wanted to, I could use the same example and allow me to chat against all my public work on GitHub, and do that very inexpensively. And I'm not going to go through this code much, but once I created the embedding database and the chat model, I'm asking how can I use a REST API like those from OpenAI and Racket, the Racket programming language, and it went through all the text files and all the Racket source files, 37 files in this repo, and the answer, that's interesting. It actually pulled up some code verbatim, which is interesting enough, but then it showed an example and then it explains what the code does. So fairly much interesting, fairly much interesting. So I'm sorry, it's taking me longer than I thought to go through here.
Your
I'm going to
pace
show you
is for me.
something.
It's good pace
Oh.
for me. You're going at a good pace for me
Okay,
anyway.
okay. So I'm going to skip a little bit here. I wanted to show a open source project, and the link is on the markwatson.com/talk.html page, but it's something called Universal Worker. Um, oh, incidentally, the trivial website for my open source project, I created all this with ChatGPT, right? I asked it to make a futuristic picture of a robot standing in front of a city that looked super high tech, and it generated that image. And then I wrote most of this in English and asked it to generate the HTML for me. Let me uh, make this bigger so it's visible. So this is very much a work in progress, and I'm going to show it in about 1 minute here, just in case anybody wants to hack on it. It took me a little bit of time getting something to work, which you all are very welcome to reuse. Let me. Yeah, so the idea of this project, which is about 5% done, is I wanted to implement long-term memory on my local computer for everything that I do. I use Apple Macintosh. And so unfortunately, this is all Mac. If you're on Linux or Windows, this is zero help to you. But it's just simple things like a library to interact with Apple Script, uh, scripts to access my calendar entries, summary, what's happening today, recent email, my Apple Notes. I use Apple. I've got probably 500 Apple Notes that I use to to keep organized, and these are all Python. I'm actually not going to run this because it'll bring up all my own calendar and email and notes. But I just wanted to kind of share that link with you. If anybody else wants to hack on their own data and they're using a Macintosh, that code will get you started so you can pretty easily use your email and notes and calendar entries as context. The other thing, which I'm not sure I can find it real quickly. LangChain has an official Jupyter Notebook section with probably about a dozen super useful examples, and the next to the last example, which we're not going to take the time to look at, but it shows you some techniques for very long-term memory using large language models. And there's a bunch of techniques you can use for that. You can put all of your interaction data in some kind of log where it's time bucketed, like maybe 1 week at a time or 1 day at a time. And if you have all of that data in a vector database we've used twice today, you can access it pretty quickly. So if you're writing your own chat model to access your own data on your own computer, you can use that to find what you're doing on your calendar or whatever last week or the week before, and you can basically chat against it. one thing that I would have loved to have covered today, but I'm working on a very old MacBook that doesn't run large language models very well. But uh, I my regular computer does not have a camera, so I cannot do demos. But I recommend Ollama is a tool for running large language models very simply on your own computer. And my little iMac over there has 32 gig of memory, and that's enough to run up to about 60 gig large language models. So it runs uh, uh, Mistral, runs the latest Llama 3 models, and the results running on my own computer are almost as good as using like Anthropic or uh, or OpenAI. Uh, and and again, I can't really demo it, but I personally prefer if you have a computer that will run these locally to do so because it's way more private. None of your data is ever leaving your system. Um, I believe that Anthropic and OpenAI, depending on which things you're using, will actually store all of your interactions and use it as training data. And if you're a company, that's not a good thing. Uh, you are safe using the OpenAI APIs, and they do not save that. So if you're a company and using OpenAI APIs to build internal systems, you're probably safe on that. Um,
Mark, we have a question
yes.
raised. How is ENKH?
Yeah.
You can ask your
Hello,
question.
can you hear me?
Yes. Yes.
Oh, hi there, Mark. Yeah, I go by Ink.
Hi,
Um,
Ink.
so yeah, hello. I come in late, but yeah, you're showing a lot of good examples, and you did a lot of good work. And you were showing the code GitHub on Shakespeare, harvesting information, um, separating the information, and also you're bringing up personal notes. So I thought, how can I train the information on myself so later on, I can ask question on it on my personal information?
Yes. Probably the best example to use and is the Shakespeare, because that's basically showing text information. Uh, uh, and you literally want to just go through the same process here of loading one or more of your own text files using a text loader, uh, and then get a list of documents, and then split those documents up into those chunks of like 1,000 to 2,000 characters each, uh, and then creating a Chroma database, and then just using this code basically verbatim from here down to the bottom uh, for a chat loop. Um, are you fairly familiar with Python programming?
Yeah, I use it here and there for utility reasons. And so would you recommend placing my data like I have, I take notes like, on the text files. Um, what's a good format to follow for my AI training
Yeah.
so it would know like what days and like what happened and stuff?
Yeah. Well, as far as like a format, I usually use, if I'm not using Apple Notes, I usually use Markdown for just about everything. Uh, and you don't really have the thing is you don't really have to worry about the formatting because uh, let's say that you have a journal file um, that you write a couple paragraphs in a personal journal every day. And so you might have like a 2 or 3, 4 megabyte text file of your journal, day by day. And somewhere in that text, you might say, I went to my cousin Samantha's wedding on April 12th, and I saw a list of people there. And so that's in there. It's just plain text. And the beauty of large language models and why these scale is because you can, first of all, have a very large amount of text. If your personal journal file was a couple gigabytes, no problem. It just take a little longer to run. But then when you're chatting against it, the way the conversational retrieval chain works is it's going to take a question like, say, when was my cousin Samantha's wedding? It's going to, using the Chroma embedding database, very, very quickly find one or more, I should say 0 or more chunks that might contain that information. Those chunks are put together, concatenated together, and then you give that to the large language model, like GPT-4, for example. And you say, given this context, please answer the question, when was my cousin Samantha's wedding? And it will simply go through those text chunks that were identified, and it'll go, oh, it'll read the text, and it'll come back and say April 12th. And then or you might say, who did I see at my cousin's wedding? You wouldn't even have to say Samantha. Once again, using the Chroma embedding database, it would find 0 or more chunks that might contain that information, concatenate them together, pass them to GPT-4, saying, given this block of text, answer the question, who did I talk to at my cousin Samantha's wedding? So, it's nothing that you couldn't, you could sit down and write a Python program to do that, right? You could, use something like the spaCy library that we used in the first example to identify all people, and you could write the code to find all the people, and then, you'd probably get a 40-line script that could answer the question, when was my cousin Samantha's wedding, given my journal, or who did I talk to there? But the point is, you don't have to do it. It scales using large language models because, again, assuming that you have a, 3 or 4 megabyte journal file of all your daily journal entries for the last year, you can ask any question at all, because, it is effectively reading that text and effectively reading and understanding your question. And I remember like 20 years ago when we used to build natural language processing systems, just a ton of work dealing with synonyms, where, you might have 2 or 3 words that meant the same thing. And so what we'd have to do is take a query, and then we would find words and replace a word with a list of possible synonyms and match it up. And the whole darn thing just did not scale. But by using large language models, you don't have to. I mean, like, you can if your journal said, I talked to these people at Samantha's wedding, you might be able to ask a question like, who did I hang with at Samantha's wedding? And it would know what you meant, a synonym, if you will. And that scales without you having to write any code to figure that out. Does that kind of make sense to you?
Yes, it does. And so mostly factual, but also does it make inferential information too, or?
Okay, now that is that's a good question. Very, very limited. I mean, I don't know how much you played with ChatGPT, but you can, you can give it word problems like Alice is 31 years old, comma, Greg is 44, comma, and Peter is 12. What are all their relative age differences? So like, I mean, that's a simple word problem, right? And it can certainly do things like that. There are models that are fine-tuned on various subjects. I mean, like there are models that are fine-tuned for logic. I downloaded a model on my Mac about 9 months ago that I really liked. It was from Harvard and Johns Hopkins University, and there's a model that was fine-tuned on a massive amount of medical data and interactions between doctors and patients. And I love that because if I have a medical question, I can query that on my own Mac, on my own system, and it's specialized for that. But for most of these models, they don't do all that well for complicated logic, but they're techniques you can use if you wanted to figure out something that you would have to like get out paper and kind of like make notes to yourself. You can give it a problem and say, break this down into all the steps that you need to do to solve the problem. And then take those steps one at a time and try to come with a final solution. So if you tell a large language model like ChatGPT to take a problem and don't just try to answer it, but to break it down into steps and then solve the steps independently, and then put all the results of solving the steps into a final answer, then yes, it can do some limited reasoning. But I mean, these large language models are just one tool. It's not like, Mathematica that, can do calculus, better than a human being. It's not something like a reinforcement. In AI, there's something called reinforcement learning, where systems learn based on interacting with an environment, and they basically build an internal model of the state of the world, and they kind of make guesses on what to do. That's called and improve in time. That's called reinforcement learning. That's a different thing, very distinct from large language models, and they can solve a different class of problems. But yeah, thank you. That's a really good question of how much actual like reasoning intelligence. And I guess my answer is a little bit okay.
I see. Okay. Can I ask you one more, which is,
Oh, absolutely.
let's
Sure.
say on my the notes, let's say, I go on this hike or something like, like this, I write about myself, like my experience, maybe like different times and months, years, in if I fit it into the text and do the training. Can I ask something like, where else have I not went or something? Like, does it have a back knowledge like above what I say to it?
No. Well, the model, and let's use GPT-4 or ChatGPT as an example, that's been trained on reading virtually everything on the web, virtually every book that's ever been published, and in 30 or 40 different human languages. That's why in my very first example, when I asked it to generate a website, I could say, oh, I like that, but change it to French. So it has a lot of innate knowledge. Like if you were to ask it what I do if I'm driving my car and the traffic light turns red, it'll tell you that you should stop. But the way that it's doing that is it's probably seen, 500,000, who knows, huge number of examples of text of people stopping at a red traffic light or stopping at a red light. And so, yeah, basically these systems, given some text, generate more text. Like something that I like to do. Let me try a simple example here. Let you. I have a parrot named Brady. My friend Bill likes to go hang gliding, and Bill wanted to take my pet parrot Brady.
How old is Brady?
Brady's 23, and he wants to take Brady.
Did Bill want to take your reading as in your temperature, or was he interested in your reading materials?
No, I want you to make up a story for me. Sorry, ChatGPT, I didn't make that clear. I want you to make up a story about my parrot Brady and my friend Bill, who wants to take my parrot Brady hang gliding.
Let's dive into a story. Once upon a time, in a small, vibrant village, there lived a clever parrot named Brady. Brady wasn't just any parrot. He had the extraordinary ability to understand and speak multiple languages. His colorful feathers and bright eyes made him the star of the village.
Talk more
One
about
sunny
being on
morning,
the hang glider.
Brady was perched on his favorite tree when he overheard a conversation between two.
Talk more about him being on the hang glider. This always happens during demos. Let me try something totally different. Draw a picture of my parrot Brady on a hang glider. Oh, there it is. So can you see that?
Yes, we can see it. It's
Yeah,
quite fun.
yeah. So not only have these systems been trained on a lot of text, but they've also been trained on photographs on the webs and books with surrounding text. And so the model, I mean, it doesn't have consciousness. Don't assume it has more intelligence than you think. But when I talk about a parrot, it certainly knows what I mean about a parrot. And it knows a hang glider. So if I say I want to see a picture of my parrot on a hang glider, of course it can do that. And you can also like make the parrot yellow. So yeah, I don't want to go too far afield on this, but I'm trying to answer your question of like how powerful are these underlying models? There's our yellow parrot. Now, most people I know in real life, my friends and family, are not very technical, but they love using the web version of this. My wife had to write a poem for a cousin reunion, and she worked an hour interactively with ChatGPT, writing a poem, telling it, anecdotes about people, and she came out with a really nice poem in the end. And that's interesting. I'm a programmer, very old programmer. And so that's why most of my interest is calling these models from Python or Common Lisp and building applications from them. Um, I wanted to show you something really, really quickly uh, uh, before we turn to more questions. There's a very nice tool called Aider, which is a interactive pair programming tool. And let me see if I can do a demo for you here. I created some files in a empty directory, and if you look at them, I just say write a Python script to create a SQLite table, and I said what I wanted the columns to be in a README file. Then if we look at the Python source code, and people read that, let me make that a little bit bigger. We look at the Python source code. I listed the function headers, but nothing in them, and a little test program. And so let me run this for you. So I'm going to tell it which files I'm most interested in. Oh, it's telling me that I don't have a Git repo, so it can't track the changes. I'm going to say yes and let it create a Git repo for me. Okay. And I have this configured to use Sonnet, which is Claude Sonnet, a very strong model for difficult interactions, and then a really cheap model for simple things for it to do. So I want to say, please write the functions in the Python file. Let's see how it does on this. Okay, so let me scroll back a little bit. Explain what marvelous stuff this has done. So it is showing me if you do like a Git, I hope people know how to use Git. If not, this won't be that meaningful to you, but it's showing me the Git changes that it's made. And so, for example, if I go over here and now look at the code here, it's filled in all of these for me. Pretty neat, huh? And let's see, didn't do anything to the README file because I didn't ask for it. I'm kind of making this up as I go along. I'm going to say, please add text to readme.md. I'm just curious what it's going to do. Nice. Okay. So it added documentation for me. So if we go back to this README file, remember how it was almost empty before? So that's pretty cool. And it's also telling me that how much it costs to use Anthropic's Claude. So far, I've spent 3 cents using this. I'm going to let's try running this and just see if it works. Okay, it worked. not very much, and again, the code it wrote for me was to create the table, form a connection, insert some test data, which it made up that test data itself, which is handy. I mean, how often when you're writing code are you a little lazy on writing test cases yourself? And then example query. The only thing I don't really like about this is I kind of wish I had more test data. So I'm going to say, please add more test data. Very good. See, in the get diff changes, it added significantly more data. Okay, so now I've now spent a nickel on this demonstration. And so so again, I think I had a link to this. Let me just oh, I did not. Hang on, I'm going to put this link because I have a feeling that several of you just very well might want to try this out. So that's a website for Aider. I really recommend you try it. I use Claude for it. Claude's very cheap to use, except they make you prepay $5 at a time for API tokens. Easy to do, and that $5 would do 100 demos like I just showed you. You know, I'm gonna, for a second, I'm gonna stop sharing my screen so I can see people, because I'd like to take questions. And I can reshare my screen. So I very much appreciated the previous questions. Say, anybody else have any application ideas we could go over, or anything in general?
So I have a question with respect to your Shakespeare example you showed it to me with respect to having a single URL being provided to the ChromaDB. Is there a way we could train from the multiple sources just by
Yes. Yeah, thank you. That's a really nice question. Let's go back to Shakespeare. Where was that?
Yeah, I think this is the one.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. So what you would want to do is notice the code, all the code right here is doing is grabbing a file from the web and saving it locally. If you already have, like, let's say you have 10 text files in the directory you're working in, then I believe you could just make a list of files, you know, put them in a Python list. And let's just make sure that's correct. I could look at the documentation, or I could ask. Yes. Yes. So can you read that okay? So it's put the file names in a list, and then for loading the documents, it's just looping over the file names, and it's creating an array all documents, and it's basically just doing an extend. So it's just taking each one and appending to the list. I'll put this in the chat so you can refer to it. And where is the chat? That's funny. When I was sharing my screen, I saw the chat. There we go. So there, you've got the code for that. Yeah, thanks. That was a good question. Is there anything else?
I had a question with respect to the Aider AI. You showed it to me.
Yes.
So before you commit the code, in your case, you generated the functions for the CRUD operations. So is there a way that you could execute the program before you commit it to the GitHub?
Oh, yes. That's another good question. Thank you. So let's find my text buffer. Okay, so it's been committing these. And there, I always just have it commit because the thing is, if I do a git status, oh, it's already committed. Yeah, that's a really good question. Since this is a talk on large language models, let me ask. Again, sorry, I could have looked it up in the documentation, but and you know what? I don't think it's going to. Nope. So that didn't answer my question, likely because I didn't ask it very well. So I think let me go to the Aider website real quickly so I can answer that.
Well, maybe it hasn't been committing things all along. Do you want to just do git log?
No. Yeah, all of those git changes have been committed. It does that for you. But that's a very good question because I've only used Aider. This is the 4th time I've tried using it. So let me just look for commit. Nope. Let's see. Let's see real quickly if we can. See, Aider automatically commits changes with a sensible commit message. Oh, that's nice. Yeah, so you know what? I would say that I would say that maybe that ought to be a new pull request. Let's just see what they say about Git integration here. Oh, disabling Git integration. So when I first ran Aider, can you see? Let me make the text bigger.
Mhm.
Yeah. So I first ran Aider, and then the file names I wanted to work with. I could have appended the no auto commits, and then it would not automatically commit.
Mm.
Oh, or you can tell it not to use Git at all. And that's interesting. Yeah, again, I believe this is literally the 4th time I've tried using Aider. I used it now when I was practicing this morning. and about a week ago and about 2 weeks ago. I like it, but it's obviously not something that I use all the time. But that said, um, I bet you that all of us here together today who are programmers will be using something like Aider a lot more often. Even 6 months from now, it'll be so much better, so much better. I actually just recently stopped using GitHub Copilot with VS Code because very many people tried that. It's an official Microsoft and GitHub product. It's $100 a year, and it basically watches everything you do in VS Code, and it handles all the usual languages like JavaScript and Python, even knows Racket and Common Lisp that make Kent and I happy. And it's very effective. But I think Aider is more interesting, and Aider is open source, which I like a lot.
I've not tried Aider. I can play around with it, but yeah, I do use various tools inside Visual Studio Code, including Copilot.
Yeah.
And Mark, I've got a question.
Yeah.
You were saying it's not doing inferencing, and now we're just talking like, I guess, just the LLM modeling in general. But like you were using the example of your cousin. Like Doug Lennon was working for a long time on the psych thing of like what kinds of things are just common sense to infer and stuff. So if there's text that's talking about like your Uncle Bill's kids or stuff like that, like is it going to figure out that level of information, or is it just working on the coincidence of seeing the word cousin? And how is that information communicated over different releases when they say it's gotten smarter? Like how do you come to know like in what ways it's, because it just seems like such an endless array of little hacks you have to know, and that I just don't understand even the process of releases in this context.
Yeah, I mean, I would love to be a inside OpenAI and see how they productize this, because making the models is one thing, but turning it into the product where you saw me talking to it, I'm still waiting for. They have a new mode where you can talk fluently to it and interrupt it. I'm hoping in the next few weeks I get early access to that. But yeah, I mean, I'm always telling people don't mistake this for like real AI. I mean, that word problem I had it solved with three people's ages and what are the relative it can do that. It can do word problems that you would give like an eighth grader, that involve a little bit of algebra, but it's only because it's seen very similar things like it before. And you almost always have to double check. And the thing that's really made it nice, Kent, recently is that most of the commercial systems now have code interpreters bundled in. So if you're working in Python, you can ask it to run the code for you.
Yeah.
Which is really nice. You can say, make up some test cases, show me the test cases, run the code, and on their servers, in a little sandbox, they'll fire up Python, and that's really good because some word problems it can't solve using logic and knowledge of language, but it can write a program to do. And I don't know how much you folks have experimented with this, but like if write Python to get some of first 30 prime numbers spelling help.
We're not
Yeah.
seeing you. We're still in conversation mode.
Oh, okay. Uh, thank you. Yeah, so I just asked it to write a little Python script and I'm gonna say yeah. So I wonder if it really did run that code. Let me I'm just curious if that's really correct. Yes, okay. So it really did run the code. That's nice. Um, so so that doesn't really answer your question of like when do you know how smart it really is, but but the ability to have it be able to write code and then run the code for you just allows it to solve so many different kind of problems that it couldn't 6 months ago. And you know, I've only been using large language models for maybe 2.5 years, and the rate of change is just phenomenal. I mean, like every morning I wake up over coffee, I time box myself about 15 minutes to a few people I follow on X uh, uh, to see what new tech has come out in the last 24 hours. You know, it just
Yeah.
uh, incredible. I mean, I remember like a decade ago being blown away by how fast deep learning, like 11 or 12 years ago, I took an online class from Hinton in deep learning when he was still up in Canada, when he was a professor before he went to Google. And I could not believe what the advances were. And you know, I sort of grokked, you know, how what deep learning was, how do you go from 3 layers to 100 layers and not, have um, numeric collapse and whatnot. Uh, and but over like 5 or 6 years, that was my job was deep learning. Uh, and it seems slow I mean, it seemed like every week or when I managed a deep learning team at Capital One, it seemed like about once a week something would come up that would really get us excited, right? And then about every couple months something would come up that would really be great. Like I used to use GANs a lot. Um, that's where you run two deep learning models. You train them jointly, and one is a supervisor of the other. And for a lot of the applications that we ran, we were running into something called GAN collapse, numerical collapse, or model collapse. And so, we were just suffering over months. And then somebody who worked for me came up with a big smile on his face and said a new paper came out and that problem was solved. So it was like every few months something really wonderful would happen. And now it's like every day or two, something really pretty cool comes out. And once a week, something comes out where I go, if I was working for the right company and the right application, that would save a ton of time, or that would make something possible that was not possible before, or that would scale when it would not scale before. So, I mean, I'm 74 years old, and I cannot even imagine what things are going to be like in 6 months, a year, 5 years, 10 years. Yeah. Yeah. So I hope I've encouraged uh, people who've not been playing around with large language models to start dipping their toe in the water, because I think it doesn't matter what you do for a job. You're going to be using these one way or another. And if you're not a programmer, definitely get a free account with ChatGPT and start using it. The free account is virtually as good as the $20 a month account. If you're a programmer, I really encourage you to pick up a language like Python's a really ugly little language, but it has all the tools around it. So it's absolutely the easiest way to get started is to use something like the Claude APIs or the OpenAI APIs. Start writing short Python programs just so you understand how it works. And then whatever programming task you're doing at work, ask yourself, is there any part of this that I could use to at least help me write code? Or uh, is there too much documentation? It's expensive, but sometimes when you're writing uh, working on a new project, if somebody gives you like 3 PDF files that are 150 pages long, it's really nice to pay the money, the dollar or two, and load them into one of these models and keep it open for half the day so you can ask questions to the documentation they gave you, as a time saver. Um, Certainly learn when it makes sense to have it write code for you. Um, Always check the code. I mean, to me, it's like you're working, and I've always been blessed by having a lot of college. In every place I've worked, we've always hired tons of college interns and then people right out of college. And I tend to view these large language models as like a bright young person with a fair amount of background through school, and you give them problems to do, but then you sit down and you talk it over with them afterwards. With ChatGPT, you talk it over by asking for clarification of why it did something. And if you think there's a mistake, I find that most of the time when ChatGPT makes a mistake, if I say, hey, you made a mistake on that, that's not right. And even if you make a suggestion for improvement, most of the time it fixes itself on the second iteration. So, large language models are not the end of AI development, but I would just really strongly recommend just getting familiar with them. Just use them, and I think I probably actually am over my time, but I'd be happy to answer any more specific questions if anybody has anything.
Other cool practical things that you've done with scripting with large language models that are not particularly hard, that as people get better with getting script access to them, they might want to follow your lead.
Yeah, the things you want to look for is using the code interpreter. And when it's built in if you're using the web interface, but if you're writing Python code, there are examples in LangChain documentation for doing that. The other thing that's really handy, I'm just going to describe in a minute or so, is tool use. So let's say you're working in Python, and I'm going to use the example from the LangChain documentation. There's an API to get the weather anywhere in the United States. And so if you write a little Python uh, function to get the weather given a name like Cincinnati or something. Uh, uh, and then maybe you write another Python tool to convert Fahrenheit to centigrade. And when you're setting up your model in the Python code with LangChain, there's a way, and the documentation is really good for this. You describe each Python function by its name, what arguments it has, and a one-line English description of what it does. So if they get weather, you say it gets the weather given the name of the location, convert Fahrenheit to centigrade or centigrade to Fahrenheit, converts, temperatures. And so then if you, as a user, using the model, the LangChain script you just wrote, if you say, what's the weather in San Diego? And it says 91 degrees Fahrenheit, you can say, what's the temperature in centigrade? And normally it wouldn't be able to do that, right? But you've written a Python function to convert that, and you've told it how to use the function, and the function is in the same Python interpreter memory space, if you will, that is your script with LangChain. It kind of mixes, natural language with code, and the tools that can be things like accessing databases for specific information.
So Mark, you're implying that it's way more practical to have the code run on their server rather than, I was kind of assuming that I would set it up so that
Oh, yes, yeah.
you would
Well,
ask me to run the
yeah.
code. That's my server to run the code or something.
Yeah, you can have OpenAI run the code for you, but I always run any scripts and any tools locally. And don't forget, I prefer strongly not to use OpenAI and Claude. On my little Mac Mini over there with 32 gig of memory, I can run Llama 3.1, which is just incredibly powerful. When I bought that computer in January, the models that I could run in 32 gig of effectively GPU memory, if you will, were really weak. And now I can run Llama 3.1, which is just a little bit below GPT 4.0.
Wow. By the way, I don't know if you saw that there's a question in the chat. It's pronounced Chuba said that they missed why you stopped using Copilot.
There's I am a bit of a cheapskate, and I've been paying for it for at least 2 years, and I find that I don't use it as much because I used it in VS Code. But when I run Emacs, I use Emacs bindings to call the OpenAI APIs for code completion and whatnot. And calling those APIs is really cheap. So I maybe would spend $1 a month in Emacs getting code completion and code suggestions. And for $100, I can take my wife out to a nice dinner. So if it
did you
were
already show
25,
us where your Emacs init stuff?
oh, sure, yeah. Let me
feel free to put that in chat.
Yeah, actually, I have, let's see. I have my .emacs file as a public GitHub. If you look me up on GitHub, I'm at GitHub, I'm Mark-Watson, my username. And let's see, where do I have Llama is used for that. I use Chat GPT shell. I think that's probably about it. Yeah, so not very much. I'll put that in the chat.
Did I get the right thing?
I'm sorry, is what?
Oh, did I post the right thing right there?
Yes, yes. Now, I'm not sure how recently I've updated that. I think it was a couple months ago. Yeah, it's in there.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
So it doesn't look like Tanny is getting out of her meeting. But I've had a lovely conversation with this product manager. I always have to be careful not to say project manager because they sound so
Yes,
similar to one another.
Yeah.
And she seems to be kind of a very aggressive, like creative product manager, and she's going to be talking about how she uses and plans to use AI tools in the range of project management things. Same time next week. Tell your friends. Other questions for Mark before we wrap?
Well, thanks everybody for coming. I'll be honest, public speaking is not my favorite thing to do, but I very much enjoyed it today. So I appreciate the invite.
Oh, Mark, we really, really hope that you come back. Not just, I mean, definitely you're a participant. But I'm really enjoying you're actually taking on the whole. Yeah, so I'm hoping you'll do another talk with us.
I will.
Okay, we'll be great.
Give 3 or 4 other people turns first. So anyway, hey, everybody have a really good day, and talk to you all later.
Okay, thanks.
People, if you can follow us on LinkedIn. I stuck the LinkedIn group in the chat. And maybe follow us on the YouTube also. Kent, how are you doing? You're muted. Oh, did my no, I guess
Worked
the
examples are good.
didn't show
Yeah,
up. Go ahead.
I was happy to see worked examples. That was really very helpful.
Yes, I'm glad. Okay. Anyone oh, right, let me remind people, this is a forum where you can give a talk about, how you're using AI ideally in the software development broadly life cycle. Oh, right. I still, yeah, I need to, yes, if someone wants to give the CUDA talk, I would really love that. The person who was supposed to give it bailed out on me. And so but I think it would be really, really good. I really want to understand. For people who don't know, CUDA is probably the closest thing we have to a standard for GPU programming. I mean, it's controlled by NVIDIA, but NVIDIA is so dominant right now. So yes, I would love someone to give a talk to introduce kind of a gentle introduction to basically GPU programming, because they are obviously amazing, or else we wouldn't be enjoying these GPU-based LLMs. Yeah, so, but other talks too, it would be great. Okay, come back, tell your friends. Thanks so much.